Hello everybody, in this video I am going to be building my very first ever custom keyboard. It's the Zouya GMK67 and this is a hobby that I kind of knew existed, and I've used various keyboards with Cherry MX Blue, Cherry MX Red switches, things like that in the past, but I've kind of fallen down a rabbit hole in the last month or so watching every keyboard video on YouTube, and after a recent video messing around with a £3 mechanical keyboard from Temu, I figured out it was time to go one step further and let's make a proper keyboard. So after watching all these videos and learning all about the process and the builds and the lubricating switches and all that stuff, I decided that I wanted to do a build where I could kind of do everything and have that full build process, but I didn't want to spend a million bajillion pounds on it, right? So I did a bit of research on what I could get that was good value for money and still be a good keyboard at the end of it. And here's the list of things that I settled on buying. Of course, I picked up the Zouya GMK67 keyboard. I picked up 2 boxes of Gateron Yellow Pro V2 switches. I picked up an ACGAM pink indigo keycap set, some JWK plate mount stabilizers, some foam stabilizer stickers from KDB fans to go under the stabilizers, and then I bought a complete lube kit from Mech Mods UK, which included Krytox 205 G0, dielectric grease, GPL 105 oil, a switch opener, tweezers, brushes, stem holder, all the things you would need to lubricate your first set of switches, right? So the Zouya GMK67 seemed like a perfect place to start because although it only cost around £50, I bought it from What Geek. It took a little while to get here, but I bought it from What Geek. But although it was only like about £50 to purchase, it had some of the more premium features that some of the more expensive keyboards have. It had the south-facing PCB so it doesn't interfere with any keycaps. It had the triple connection modes, Bluetooth, 2.4 gigahertz, and wired. And then finally it was gasket mounted too, right? So it should give a little bit of squish on the keyboard as well and make a bit of a softer typing experience. And it seemed like that was a lot of stuff to get, as well as a knob for £50. And then finally, it was available in purple, and purple's the best color. So I was sold when I saw purple, basically. So moving on to the build, I decided to build it live on my Twitch channel. I thought it'd be a fun stream to do over there. And it turned out it really was, but I just want to take a minute to thank all the people that came along. A lot of people from the keyboard community saw me streaming on Twitch and dropped into chat and were offering me advice and were very friendly. I almost felt like I might get a little bit of that, like, oh, this guy's a noob, he doesn't know what he's doing, he's got the cheapest keyboard you can find, do you know what I mean? And they wouldn't really be interested, and they might kind of just come in and slate me in chat, but they didn't. Everyone was super friendly, super helpful, and gave me a lot of advice along the way, which made the process so much easier, so much more enjoyable. So thank you to everyone in the keyboard community that stopped into that stream. It was very much appreciated to have you by my side along the way and help me get to where I got to in the end. So first step was to obviously open up the keyboard and have a little look at it and see the purple in all its glory. Inside the box, you basically don't get loads, but you get the keyboard itself, you get a switch and keycap puller, and you get a white braided USB cable, which is not a bad USB cable, to be fair, it's quite nice. It's a little thing that they could have cheaped out on, but they didn't, they included a braided one, so I was thankful for that. But then I needed to actually open up the board itself to be able to get to the PCB and everything inside, which I was a little bit worried about because I'd seen a lot of people struggling with it in other videos I'd watched. People were prying it open with credit cards and prying tools and all sorts of things. And it looked quite frightening and it looked like it might break. I was quite scared because there's no screws to get this one open. It's just all clipped in with plastic clips. However, I'd seen on one video, I wish I could remember who it was to give them credit, but I'd seen a video where someone had just got their thumbs on the inside of the case and pushed it upwards from the inside, and it popped the top clips open. And I thought I was going to try that first before I start stabbing at it with stuff, and lo and behold, it popped right open. It was still a little bit scary, you know, plastic clips feel like they could break so easily, but it opened and I got it open and we got the top off eventually, and then we were inside. So I then moved on to removing those really awkward cables that are kind of sandwiched underneath the foam so I could get the PCB out. And there was 3 on this board. There was one connecting the knob to the PCB, one connecting the battery, and there's one connecting the daughter board, which has all the switches and USB socket on it. But we got that off, got everything out, and we were ready to move forward. I wasn't really sure where to start, but I asked chat and we decided we were going to start with the stabilizers first, and then we could try them out on the PCB, take them off, try, and then readjust if we needed to. So, as I said, I bought extra stabilizers, JWK plate mounted stabilizers, because I wasn't sure if screw-in ones would fit this board or not. I'd heard some people say they did, some people say they didn't. So I went for plate mounted, and I figured they'd be better than the stock ones that came with it. And I think they probably are. I didn't use the stock ones, I took them straight off, and then I moved on to trying to figure out how on earth do you take apart and put together a stabilizer so that I could lubricate them. And then after a bit of fiddling around, I lubricated the housings with the Krytox 205, and then I lubricated the wires with the dielectric grease, and I took a little bit of time to get them all put back together. Got a couple of them the wrong way round, so they were like opposite to each other and they didn't quite work right. We took them apart again, started again, and eventually got to the point where the stabilizers were on, and then this was the moment to throw in a couple switches, put a couple keycaps on, and have my first experience pressing a key on a custom keyboard, and this is what happened.
Spacebar fix. Ooh, oh. Okay. Now I know. Oh my god. Oh my. Oh. Jesus. I've never felt a keyboard like that before. Oh, fuck. No way.
So as you can imagine, after that, I was suddenly even more motivated to get through this build, get everything done, and try this keyboard out for real, right? During the process, I decided not to use the foam stickers under the stabilizers. One reason being that I could always add them later if I felt like it needed it. Second reason being it gave me another excuse to open up the keyboard at a later date and mess around with it again, right? So then I knew I had a long way to go still, because I was gonna hand lube every single switch for the keyboard. And that was the part I was dreading, to be quite honest. I'd seen people say they hated doing it. I've seen people say it takes hours and hours to do. And I thought it's gonna be one of those things where it's kind of a rite of passage. I need to do it, but I probably won't ever wanna do it again. So I started out by taking that switch opener, opening all the switches up and separating them out into all their individual parts: bottom housing, top housing, stems, and springs. And I was left with a massive pile of stuff, but I embarked upon that mission of lubricating every single switch. So I decided to bag lube the springs. So I threw them into like a resealable bag with about 15-20 drops of GPL 105 oil, and gave them a really good shake, and then set them to one side while I started on the switches. I decided to do them part by part to try and help improve consistency. So I did all of the bottom housings first, and at this point somebody recommended that I take the packaging from the switches and use it as like a makeshift lube station, which was actually really helpful and seems really obvious, but I would never have thought of it on my own. So thank you to person in chat who recommended that. And eventually I made it through all the bottom housings and moved on to the stems, which was a much trickier, fiddlier part of the lubrication process. I grabbed the little stem holder, and over time I felt like I got into a bit of a rhythm with it. And the whole time I was just trying so hard not to over lube. Everyone is saying less is more, less is more. Don't over lube your switches, don't over lube your switches. So in my thought process was the only thing that could go wrong is I put too much lube on it. Apart from that, anything else, I could probably get away with it, and it probably won't be too bad. And it's not gonna be worse than the keyboards I've used in the past, right? So eventually I made it through, and I feel like I did an all right job of it. I don't think it went too bad, to be honest. And then I had to move on to reassembling all the switches, putting them all back together. Took me a while to figure out which way around everything goes. Again, chat was very helpful there too. And I was super pleased when I got to the end and realized that everything was there. I hadn't lost any springs, I hadn't lost any stems. I had all the switches and they were all complete and ready to go into the board. Now, I have to say, although I was dreading doing this before I started doing it, I actually found it somewhat therapeutic to complete that process. Once I got into it, I had some chill music playing, I had chat to keep me company on stream, and I actually really enjoyed doing it, and it's something I'll definitely do again. So if it's something you haven't tried and you're thinking about doing it, just go for it. Give it a shot, put some music on, put a TV show on in the background or something, and just get to it. Now, it did take several hours to complete it, but I actually enjoyed it. I'll definitely do it again. Now, I don't know If I do it 5 more times, I might start to hate it. Yeah, maybe, I'm not sure. But for the first time doing it, I actually thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was very satisfying. And just to know that all those switches that are in the keyboard have been lubricated by myself is just quite a rewarding thing, right? So at this point, there was only 3 things left to do. I needed to put the switches into the board, I needed to put the board back together, and I needed to put the keycaps on. So I got to putting the switches into the board, and it didn't go quite as smoothly as I thought. I thought they were gonna just all pop in really easily and snap in, but I had a bit of trouble getting them to go all the way in. They weren't quite clipping into the plate, and it took me a minute to figure out what to do about it. Like, they were socketing into the sockets fine, they were in, but they weren't all the way down. They looked wrong. They didn't look like they were in properly. So after a bit of messing around and sort of fiddling with it, I realized that the tolerances on the plate were so tight that pushing the switch in was actually pushing the plate down, and it was flexing a little bit. So I just needed to like get my fingers under the plate and pull it up a little bit, and the switch would snap into place. So once I figured that out, we were rolling, and we carried on putting all the switches into the board. Once that was done, we were onto the keycaps, the pretty and fun part, right? Well, I found it all fun, but this is probably the most fun part apart from using it. And I was a little concerned about the keycaps because I'd seen them on WhatGeek when I ordered the keyboard, and I had seen pretty colors that matched, that I felt matched the keyboard really well. And I just ordered them, and I didn't realize until afterwards that they were XDA profile keycaps. Now, I've only ever used like OEM cherry style profile key. There's those kind of styles where the rows are different heights, and XDA is a flat profile. So I was worried I might absolutely hate it, but it was done now. I had those keycaps, and that's what was going in there, and I kind of had this idea in my head that it was going to look awesome. So I carried on putting the keycaps on. It took a little bit of trial and error with some of them, where you get like multiple enter switches, multiple shift keys of slightly different sizes, figuring out which ones were the right ones, but it wasn't too bad at all. Eventually got them all on, realized it does look as cool as I thought it was going to look, and then it was time to connect the keyboard up and make sure it all worked properly. So the VIA website has a like key checker, so you can press all the keys on your keyboard and see if they're all working properly. So I headed over there, started pressing all the keys. Had a slight moment of confusion when some of the keys were acting differently to what I thought they should be. For example, the Windows key was the Alt key and the Alt key was the Windows key. I was super confused for a good while. I then realized that this keyboard has a PC and Mac switch on the top of it to switch between PC and Mac. I'm using PC. It was set to Mac when it came out of the box. I switched it back and it all went back to normal, right? Carried on testing all the switches, and found that one key, I think it was the P key if I remember rightly, just didn't work at all. Nothing happened. When you pressed it, nothing happened. Now at this point I kind of panicked. Have I broken the keyboard? Is something wrong? Am I never going to be able to use it? Am I going to have to spend the next however many months until I build a new one not having a P key? But chat reassured me, don't worry, there's always one. Just pop it out and have a look. So I popped the keycap off, I popped the switch out, and it was soon very apparent why it wasn't working. Basically, I'd bent the pin to hell. It was kind of like zigzag shaped by the time I took it back out of there. And that was kind of a relief because I knew it was a simple thing to fix. But rather than try and straighten it, I had a few extra switches. So I just swapped it in for another switch and thought, let's just put a good one in there rather than try and straighten it out and risk it breaking or not making good contact. I've got spares, I'm just gonna use a spare one. So I popped the spare one in. Popped the keycap back on, and the P key worked, and we were all good to go. So then after a brief moment of admiration and looking at the board and talking about how pretty it was and messing around with the different RGB lighting settings and stuff, it was the time that everybody had all been waiting for. It was time to do a typing test and see how the keyboard sounded.
Definitely feels weird.
So ultimately, I was very pleased with the keyboard. It's definitely the best keyboard that I've ever used. And now those XDA keycaps have taken a little bit of getting used to, being so flat. I'm not used to them. I'm not completely sold on them. However, I am adapting to it and getting used to it. I think it's one of those things where you just need to spend some time with it. And on top of that, I'm super happy with how it sounds for my first board. I really love the sound of it. I think there's a little bit of tweaking that could be done maybe on the space bar. There might be a slight bit of ticking in there, although it's something that I haven't got the ear for yet, so I don't really know. But if anything, the fact that there is a couple things that I think can be improved is good, because that means I've got an excuse to open it up and mess around with it, play with it again, and the journey is nowhere near over, right? So if anything, after doing that, the custom keyboard rabbit hole has only got deeper for me, and I'm gonna be diving in head first. There's 1,000 different things I wanna try, from switches to keycaps to boards to modding techniques. All this stuff I wanna be trying. So definitely hit that sub button if you enjoyed this video, because there will be a lot more keyboard related content coming up on the channel, trust me on that one. Apart from that, I hope you all had fun building this first keyboard with me, and what do you think of it? Let me know in the comments. Do you think it's pretty? I think it's super pretty. But until next time, people, remember, you are all awesome. Stay Banproof, and I'll see you all really soon. Peace.